All right. Hey everyone. So the organizers told me that it was supposed to be an informal slash chill discussion, but it looks like there's a lot of people actually listening. So we'll get right into it. Are you ready for the questions? Do you have a? Oh, we're waiting on a microphone. All right. All right. So the topic was supposed to be next generation blockchains and their applications. And my first question is, would you consider that a rollup is a blockchain?
Yes. Next question.
Oh, you don't. Your microphone isn't working.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I would agree. It's most definitely a blockchain. The difference, I would say, is that there's a relationship with another blockchain when you're talking about optimistic rollups or Zika rollups that doesn't really exist when you're on a specific L1. And like, I don't know, I think it's an interesting relationship because it basically plugs into an ecosystem that's already existing. And I think that's very powerful.
Yep.
And yeah, for us, like the choice of this blockchain is very important. So we really like Ethereum both technically and also its philosophy. And so for that's a really important thing for us. And I will also say that they're sort of specialized in their own way because it's very important for the L1 blockchain to be very secure and decentralized. It doesn't need to be so scalable because that's the part that the L2 blockchain handles.
All right. Going on your different rollups, so we have ZK rollup, validity rollups, and optimistic rollups. What do you think the biggest misconception people have about your own specific rollup? That's a tough one.
That it's useless to use optimistic rollups because ZK rollups are just around the corner.
I would say that I think people underestimate how close we are to getting production stuff out. And people who are in underestimate how big the chasm is to having something that is as developer friendly as Ethereum.
All right. And what do you think the actual, not the biggest misconception, but the actual reality of like the biggest inconvenient about your rollup is?
Okay, so I think that using proofs allows you to coalesce a lot of computation into a single proof that somebody will verify, and that gives you a lot of nice properties. But it doesn't put away the fact that when you're executing a network and you want to have a common state of the word, a common platform where every program can interact like Ethereum and have full composability, this basically means you need to have one machine executing everything sequentially. And I don't think proofs change that much. So we're still bound to the same limits that what can you do on a single machine if you want a single chain. We have more flexibility than other platforms because you need less decentralization because you can prove what happened, but you're still bound to that limit. Does that make sense?
This is, you think, the biggest inconvenient about Zika rollups?
Yeah, the bottleneck is, like, there's a bottleneck there, and it's in sequencing, it's not in proving.
It's a difficult question because we're pretty much at a stage where using Ethereum or other similar blockchains and optimism, it's exactly the same. So I would say the issues with the rollup are not really issues with the rollup, but issues with usability of blockchains in general. Everybody that has onboarded in crypto and used wallets and MetaMasks, they know that a lot could be improved there. So I would say that that's the biggest challenge, is improving onboarding, user experience, and things like that.
All right. And so currently, if we look at the state of most rollups, would they be optimistic or validity rollups, it's currently pretty centralized. Usually there's only one sequencer. When do you think we could say, okay, this rollup is centralized? Do we need to have 1 sequencer, 10 sequencer, 100 sequencer, 1,000 sequencer?
I think the network will be decentralized when there's going to be a massive hack and the people are going to be able to launder the money on the network and get out of it without anybody stopping them. That's when we're decentralized. It's going to hurt as fuck, but that's the heuristic I have in mind.
I mean, this is a proof that it's decentralized, right?
Yeah, it is. It's a painful one, but...
I don't entirely agree. Here's why. So normally the network's already secure, right? There's validation of the proof, and in optimistic rollups there is fault proofs, at least when we actually deploy them, but I'm working on that when I'm not giving talks. So it should already be secure. The problem today with the centralization, right, there being only one sequencer, is availability of the blockchain. So if the sequencer goes down tomorrow, then nobody can do any transactions. Doesn't mean they can, steal the money or anything. It's just that your money is there, it's locked, and you can't interact with it. So that's why we need decentralization of the sequencer. And I would say because security is not at play, it doesn't need to be as decentralized as something like Ethereum, because there's no way that someone can take control and steal everything. It just needs to be reliable enough. So you probably want at least one sequencer in every region of the world and things like that. But so, if you have 100 sequencer, that probably would be plenty, as long as they're geographically distributed.
Yeah, and when I was mentioning a hack, I was mentioning at the app level, not necessarily at the chain level. But yeah, knowing how much sequencers is enough. Funnily enough, this is not, we shouldn't be answering these questions. Apps should be answering these questions. We should ask the Aave, the makers of the world, how comfortable would you be with that much sequencers? And I think the issue is not necessarily the security of the chain, but more censorship resistance. Because specifically for Zika rollups, operators can't cheat. They can't prove, they can't do an invalid state transition, so they can't steal your funds, but they can choose to censor your transactions. So I think it's much more important for censorship resistance than it is for safety.
I have a good answer there. We also have something against that in optimistic rollups, in the sense that you can send a transaction on Ethereum, and it will be force included in the rollup. So there's no way for a sequencer to censor you indefinitely, as long as they can't censor Ethereum itself.
All right, interesting. You were talking recently about onboarding new people to blockchain in general. What's the biggest pain point in onboarding new devs to the rollups? Because we all know that we need builders. Do you see any specific pain point right now?
No.
No.
I mean, to blockchain in general, it's the same as the other question. It's completely the same. We use the same language, the same tools as Ethereum. So the problems are the same. I would say there's no significant difference.
Yeah, for us, it's definitely much more of a pain. So we use a different smart contract language than what most people are used to, which is Solidity. But the issue is not necessarily Solidity or Cairo in and of itself. It's the tooling that goes around it. It's being able to run your test fast. It's being able to have non-regression testing. It's having a stable version that doesn't break every month or two. We're still in alpha, so all of this is being developed as we speak. And so it's still very much a very raw developer experience. So the result of that is that for the developers building on Starknet, usually we have both ends of the curve, from very new to very experimented. So we have the people who are new, want to get into blockchain programming, and they think, oh, Solidity is too crowded. Let me look at Solana, Cardano. Some are lucky and end up on Starknet and learn Cairo. And you'd be surprised. I've actually met a large number of people who never wrote Solidity code and know how to write Cairo code. And then we have the other end of the curve, people who are were here 5 years ago, who saw the light for Ethereum. It saw that it allowed you to do stuff that Bitcoin couldn't allow you to do, and they see the same thing in Starknet. It allowed you to do stuff that you can't do elsewhere, and they're okay with having rickety tools. They are okay with having to debug the things themselves because they did it 5 years ago for Ethereum. So we have these two kind of categories, and the people in the middle who are familiar running an app on Solidity, usually their challenge is, how do I have my app deployed on 10 chain, how do I deploy it on the 11th? And then unfortunately, it's hard to onboard them because it requires a lot of retooling and rewriting. But retooling is definitely the biggest pain point.
All right. And talking about blockchains and rollups, if you close your eyes right now and you envision or you imagine how Zika rollups and optimistic rollups will be in 1 year or 5 years from now, what do you see?
What a question.
So in 1 year, I think we will start to get applications that are massively scalable on Starknet, just like we have massively scalable application on StarkX today. I think we'll get a few application-specific chains settling on a rollup. So you'll have basically just the same way you have StarkX and DYDX being able to run their own thing. You'll have this thing at the chain level on L3. Yeah, but for very specific applications, right? Now, 5 years from now, I think we'll get much higher volume of applications with a lot of copycats and everything because it will be easier to copy, paste, and move on.
Yeah, so I think that the main thing is that adoption of layer 2s will continue. And for where we'll be, we'll have the default proof, so we'll be actually secure, and that will put people's minds at ease, understandably. And then we'll like work on scalability, and we have a lot of like ideas there, both vertical scalability, so just making things run faster, so optimizing Go Ethereum is something we're thinking a lot about, and also horizontally, so there's like demand for application-specific rollups, and so StarkX is an example of that, and we want to do the same thing, but within the optimism ecosystem, and so like give these rollups guarantees of composability with sorry, not Ethereum, optimism. So yeah, so scalability and security, I would say. And
I would add two things. I think we'll also start seeing, like, 5 years from now, for sure, we'll start seeing applications that exist on optimistic rollup or Zika rollup and just couldn't exist on L1. So we'll see that, and I think within 5 years, it's a reasonable time to think that we'll have product market fit for these kinds of application. And the second thing I think we'll see, it's not going to take a year, but within 5 years, I hope that we'll start seeing cooperation, more tight cooperation between rollups. We were discussing yesterday, and there are probably technical stuff we could do together. And right now, we're all heads down trying to deliver and have something that works. But ultimately, we're all on the same team. We're all on Team Ethereum. We're building on the same network, and for sure there will be synergies. I think we'll see them, like 5 years is a reasonable time to see the first stuff.
yeah, completely agree.
So it's interesting because you just said we're all on Team Ethereum. And my question was going to be, could we imagine settling rollups on other chains than Ethereum?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like for Zika rollups, at least, verifying a proof is a mathematical operation. If your blockchain network is able to verify your this mathematical operation, why not? Adrien was here earlier. I don't know where he is. He's working at Tezos. Tezos is working on optimistic rollup and Zika rollups. So you could definitely. Now the question is, like for us at least, we stick to Ethereum because it has the largest community, largest liquidity, largest activity. I mean, it's the top one where we can deploy what we want to deploy.
Yeah, same thing. So because Ethereum is so secure, it is like I would say the best one to use. The only thing that might you have second thoughts about that would be the cost. Because currently, so something we absolutely did not talk about yet, but when you do a transaction on Optimism, 95% of the cost you pay is the cost to post the transaction from the data to Ethereum. So that is fairly costly. But we're working on this new thing called dank sharding. Very funny name. And that basically will massively increase the amount of data you can post in Ethereum, and so consequently lower the cost. So once that is solved, the question is, will it stay low? Will it increase? I think at Optimism we're very committed to Ethereum in particular, and so if there are further issues, I think we would like to further help scale Ethereum itself so that it can accommodate rollups rather than go to another blockchain. I do expect, though, that people will make rollups on our blockchain, and I think they might do it with our technology because it's open source, and it has been cloned a few times already. So there's like our rollups called Metis and Boba. These are just literally like clones of our things. Then they launched it, put a token on it. So it's been done a few times quite successfully in the past. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are people working on this already, like doing a roll-up for Avalanche or maybe Solana. Doesn't make sense, but yeah, I know people at Kronos, the roll-up from crypto.com. They're looking at that.
And we mentioned Ethereum because it's like the top one chain in terms of liquidity, users, etc. Liquidity is a real topic because DeFi has become a bit huge now, and DeFi uses liquidity. And I often hear liquidity begets liquidity, meaning the more liquidity you have, the more liquidity you attract, etc. Currently, with rollups, are we going to face a problem of like fragmented liquidity? Are we going to have like some liquidity on Starknet, some liquidity on Optimism, some liquidity on Arbitrum, etc.? Or do you think we can find ways to like gather up all of that liquidity?
So the bridging mechanism in Starknet allows you to really have tight coupling with L1. So technically you can use L1 liquidity in your Starknet application. You can drive your liquidity who is on L1 from L2. So like it can be fragmented, but it doesn't have to be. Like you can basically use the liquidity from L1 on Starknet, which I think is like kind of answers that issue. It doesn't necessarily fragment it. Now also we mentioned earlier, or I mentioned earlier, storage proofs maybe. So basically proving what happened on a blockchain A to blockchain B. I think having these kind of primitives will facilitate cross-chain communication, and there are interesting designs to come up with dexes where liquidity can sit on various chains at the same time. Still blurry, but it's an interesting area of research.
Yeah, it's a lot of thoughts about this. You can go like super, super deep. I think generally there are design trade-offs in how you do this. It's very difficult, if not to say impossible, to have something that's fully composable, like you would have within a single blockchain, where you can just swap and then do something else, then swap something else. That's almost impossible. If you just require to do, one swap, like you said, on Starknet you can use Ethereum liquidity, but you can't really compose that with other things, or at least there's like some properties and you have to choose some of them. Like, maybe the liquidity providers will have a risk that they need to carry. Maybe you will have more slippage and things like that. I think the only way to sort of get out of the trade-off is itself a trade-off, which is to have basically off-chain market makers, which basically, take the risk of supplying you the liquidity somewhere else. They do basically an arbitrage in real time. But then you rely on this off-chain agent being there when you need them.
Yeah, but if they execute their engine with a provable stack, then you're kind of safe.
Yeah, it's getting deep, but I have doubts that you can circumvent the trade-off that way, basically.
All right. Now talking about applications, if you had one application in mind that you would like to see built on a rollup, which one would it be? Top of your head.
I like to see some more games that are actually interesting. But yeah, I don't, I'm not sure what I want to see, but I know it when I see it. For me, the one game that's super interesting in blockchain right now is Dark Forest, because it uses properties of the blockchain to do something new and interesting that you couldn't do in Web 2. But there are other models where basically just having the things on chain and then the games being extensible are also very interesting. Like recently I saw this guy did on the Optimism testnet a game. It's a map with tiles, and every tile is a contract that lets you interact with it. And so, what he had done was you could do a farm, and you could just say, okay, I'm going to plant a seed, and then later I can come and harvest. But anybody can come and build their own sort of box that plugs into this map. And so, as a game, I'll be honest, it's not very fun, but it's a really interesting concept, and I think we'll see more of these extendable, pluggable game, which blockchains really makes easier to build.
I'm looking forward to, it's not necessarily specifically an application, but I'm really curious to see how user experience will change with rollups, and specifically one key concept we have on Starknet is called account abstraction. It's basically replacing your account with a smart contract wallet. You have the guys at Argent here, raise your hand. You can ask them questions about it, it's pretty cool. And I think this gives you the opportunity to totally redefine the user experience on a rollup and make it super easy to use, super transparent, while keeping full custody of your funds or your assets. So I don't know what it should be, if it's a game, if it's DeFi, whatever, but I'm curious to see applications where you're using the blockchain, you're in full control of whatever assets you have, but you don't really need to think about gas, sending the transactions, and all these things that make it hard to use today, right, for normal people, not nerds like you guys.
Funny, really funny. You mentioned Dark Forest. Could you explain it in 30 seconds? What it is about and why it's interesting, technology-wise?
Excellent question, especially since I've never played it actually. But one thing that I know they do is that they have this cryptographic fog of war, and so you can't. Normally, blockchains are full information; you can see everything. But what I think they do is that you sort of need to use computation power to hash or break some weak cryptography they put there, and then you can learn where your opponents are. So that's one of the things they do. And I think you also, when you make a move in the game, you don't post the move in the clear on the blockchain. Instead, you post a zero-knowledge proof that your move is valid. And what that does is that people don't know what you're doing. But if later they want to, I guess maybe you need to reveal later your position or something like that. I am not entirely sure. I know there's some cool stuff though.
Yeah, I think it works like that. All right, and one of the biggest advantage of blockchains is, I think one of you mentioned, is accountability. Do you think we could someday see a government move to a DAO model where everything is on the blockchain and everything is transparent and every budget is on either voted or at least on the blockchain, meaning accountable?
I think any technology that is sufficiently advanced and established and used will end up being used by government. But when you look at today, our government leveraging the internet? Sure, they are. Are they the biggest organization leveraging the internet? No. Facebook is, Google is. You know these heuristics, right? There are more people on Facebook than on the biggest countries on earth. And so I think that right now, institutions, banks, governments don't have an incentive to use the blockchain because they have worked around these trust issues by basically excluding people, and for all intended purposes, it works well for them, right? They don't need something else. So I think that blockchain DAOs will first find product market fit and usability with underserved community, people who can't have a legal framework work for them, associations that can't manage funds together, and they will put up with the complexity, with the cost associated with running that, and eventually things will get better, tooling will get better, costs will lower, and they will have a stack that works better than the legacy stack. And at that point, you will start seeing big organization, NGOs, and eventually governments moving to the blockchain. But that's what makes it an interesting industry. This won't happen in the next 5 years or 10. It's probably something we'll talk about with our kids later on. But that's what makes it cool, right?
Yeah, I think it can be used. Is it a good idea? Is another debate. Do people really want full transparency? Do people have the time to engage with all the things? I think in general transparency is better, but it's probably not gonna happen like suddenly everything's transparent. But there are like for instance, on-chain voting is really, really interesting. And I think probably, so if you wanna talk with people that are absolutely against electronic voting, you just ask developers. I mean, all of you are developers, and everybody knows it's a terrible idea because we know everything that can go wrong. And it being on the blockchain, at least personally, it like removes a lot of fears that I have because it's all in the open. So the code is on the contract, you can audit it, and you know that this code is actually gonna run because of how the blockchain works. So for me, it removes a lot of the problem. And using zero-knowledge technology makes it so that nobody can see your vote, nobody can even censor your vote, because they won't see what you're voting for. And they might not even see who you are. They just see a signature signed by someone, but when you transmit that, you don't see who you are. So there's a lot of issues being solved that could be used for on-chain voting.
I would counter with the fact, or my opinion is that for a voting system or a governance system, what really matters is not necessarily the governance mechanism or the technology that's being used, it's its legitimacy, meaning how willing people are to say, yes, I agree with these rules, I understand them, I think they're transparent enough. Having transparent code is something we like as a subcategory of a small subcategory of the general population. But I think that when people feel as comfortable voting with a smart contract because the code is open source as they feel comfortable putting a piece of paper in an envelope because it's an envelope, you can see it in the box, it's transparent, there's no way they can cheat. I think we have a long way to go before computational voting system have this kind of legitimacy.
Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, completely agree. I was mostly saying that currently electronic voting has no legitimacy among the people who should be, convinced if you were to be convinced.
I agree.
So oftentimes in a panel like this, we hear the question like, what should we put on the blockchain? Should governments be on the blockchain? Should gaming be on the blockchain? My question is like, do you have anything that you think should never go on the blockchain? I was expecting the answer of like personal data, like medical data, stuff like that, because you never know if...
You're answering your own questions now.
Yeah, because I'm seeing that...
I was going to say your kids' pictures, but in general, like storing data on chain, I think it's not that good of an idea. It may change in the future though, but I don't know, any kind of data that has some value, if you want to tether it on chain, whether transparently or not transparently, there might be a use case for that. So yeah, I don't have a good answer to that question.
Yeah, for sure in the clear, you should not put too much stuff on the blockchain. But then when it comes to encrypted data, I can actually imagine a system, is it practical or not, I don't know, but where you put your encrypted medical data on the blockchain, and then there's a protocol to mark, say, oh, this hospital is authorized to access it, so they download it encrypted, and then you just send them a key or something for that. So there could be use cases for that also.
But then the problem is like, okay, but in 10 years from now or 20 years from now, you've put your encrypted data, but you never know if like encryption breaks, and 20 years from now, everyone knows what NOSWAP had in 2022.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, but I don't know. Fearing about encryption breaking, to me, it's important. We have to think about it. But like, if you send an attack helicopter to attack a castle with guys with shields and swords, who would win? For sure the helicopter, right? It's way more powerful. Does it mean that castles with swords and shields were useless at the time they were used? No, because technology always moves forward. So because things might break eventually, doesn't mean you shouldn't use them now if you have no other alternatives.
Yeah, and currently your medical records are on some server somewhere, and that's vulnerable to all the vulnerability in Linux and the browser and whatever. So there's already this attack factor, really.
All right, got it. And now the last question I have is, are you personally excited about any other L1 chain? Or are you just in like, except Bitcoin and Ethereum, of course?
To be fair, there's so much different L1s that I just don't have time to explore them that much. So I know that Solana is getting a lot of flack for what they're doing, but there's an engineering feat there in trying to execute that many transactions. That seems like a big challenge. And it's not an L1 chain, but I think that trying to coordinate governance for a decentralized network is an extremely interesting challenge. And what the guys at Optimism are doing is fascinating.
Thank you. Now, I do think technically Ethereum has the best roadmap. I've looked a little bit into other chains, but yeah, I don't also... There's never enough time in crypto to learn about everything you want to learn about. The one I'm curious about and that I've heard good things about is Elrond, because it's a proof-of-stake blockchain that's sharding as more or less in the style that was originally envisioned in Ethereum. And it's not a perfect solution. I can already see a couple issues with it, but I think it's interesting that they have it today and it's running. So they have at least executed pretty well on that.
There's also it's a very niche, but there's this payments blockchain that never really took off. That's based on the Mimblewimble protocol, and I think the Mimblewimble protocol to scale payment is really interesting. I hope we get to implement it on Starknet, but but yeah, just this.
All right. Well, I think it's about time. So thank you for taking the time, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you.